Hey guys, in this video I'm going to go over the filters section of the Pro panel. So basically this is broken up into two parts. We have our filter panel at the top, and then we have corrections. So let's start with filter panel up at the top. We have a bunch of different actions here, filters and effects that I'm going to go through now. So first off, let's talk about warm glow. So warm glow is going to work really well for sunset images, portraits, landscapes, any of the sort. And it's going to apply it very strong at first. So you can always dial this back using the opacity. Also, you can expand the group and select color adjust if you want to change the hues. So maybe you want to make this a little bit more red, for example. Or say you were using this in an aurora image, you can make this even like green or something like that. So change it up. Also, if you want to reposition the actual glow, you can double click on this guy here and then just move this around in the frame like so. This is just a gradient fill, and then just click OK to finalize that. So I usually use this at a very low opacity when I do use it, and this would add just a nice little bit of warm atmosphere to the photo. Alright, so next up we have flare. So flare is pretty cool, especially if you have a shot with the sun right in it. So you can just move this right over to your area with your light source, and you can use the transform tool at the bottom if you want to, even to make this bigger as well. Again, you can expand the folder to see color adjust here and make it, for example, a little bit more red if you wanted to. And you can also reduce the actual layer of the flare or the group itself to reduce the effect. Alright, so next up is Lux. So this is really cool, and I named this Lux because it's the closest thing that I've gotten to the Lux filter on Instagram. So if you ever turn on that little magic wand and see that photo kind of come to life with the contrast and the brightness, this is similar to that. So if I turn that off, you can see, and back on, it just adds a nice little bit of pop to the image. And by default, this comes at 70%, so you can increase the strength just a little bit more, or you could decrease the strength as well. Or you could always duplicate the layer or just run the action again to increase it. Alright, so next up we have Orton. So Orton effect is very popular. I usually use it in combination with high pass, so this is going to be high pass sharpening here. So if you want to use it separately, we have Orton here and then also high pass. Or if you want to use them together, then you're just going to click Orton sharp. And then it's going to give you a few different dialog boxes here. So we have the radius set to 60 by default. I click OK. So if you wanted the Orton to be brighter, for example, you would bring out some of the shadows here. Or if you wanted to be darker, you would bring this over to the right more. Or if you wanted to make it less bright, you could take out some of these highlights as well. Or more bright, you would increase the highlights. So if you're happy with the default, you can just click OK when this opens, or you can adjust it and then click OK. And then next up comes your high pass. So by default, this is 2.8, which usually works really well. And then it applies that. So if I turn that off and on, you can see we've added that nice dreamy glowy Orton, but also the high pass sharpening effect as well. And they are on individual layers, so you can adjust these as well. So maybe you think the sharpening's too strong, you can dial this back a little bit. Or if you think the Orton's too strong, you can dial that back individually as well, or increase it. And you can do the same thing with the actual group itself, so you could turn down the opacity if you thought the effect together was too strong. Alright, so your standard vignette is going to give you a typical oval shape vignette around the image here, and you can always adjust the fill of this if you want to slightly to make it a little stronger. By default, the fill is set to 0, and this looks pretty strong. And if you want to make it less strong, then you can just turn down the opacity of the actual layer. So one of my favorite things that I've added to this panel particularly is the custom vignette. So this is so cool, guys. You just need to use some type of lasso tool or selection tool, and all you'll do is you'll actually just draw your custom vignette like so, and then you'll just go back to your filters and then click custom vignette. And by default, this is going to feather it at 400 pixels, so just click OK. This works really well. And now you can see we've drawn a custom shaped vignette. So this is really handy if you want to exclude something from the vignette, like a river or something like that, or you don't want that typical oval vignette and you just want it very customized. This is going to be very handy. Or you could even further feather it by clicking Gaussian blur with the layer mask selected, and then you can even further feather it by just increasing the blur. Alright, so once you're happy with that, you can always stamp up or merge down or flatten as well by holding down shift. So next up, let's talk about the Vivid. So we have Vivid 1, Vivid 2. Vivid 1 is going to add some color and some contrast, and it's going to be kind of medium strength. And Vivid 2 is going to do the same thing, but kind of on a little more extreme level. So you can always dial back the opacity of the overall groups of these guys, or you can dial back the individual parameters as well if you think maybe the color's too strong or the contrast is too strong. So I usually just stick with Vivid 1, but Vivid 2 does definitely work in some scenarios. Alright, we also have a fall foliage and an enhance foliage button here, so check this out. If we just click enhance foliage, this is going to enhance the actual colors in the foliage in your shot. So if I turn that off and on, you can see it just increases the saturation there. And then fall foliage is actually going to take the green or yellow foliage hues and make them fall colored. So this is an extreme example here. You can see because some of the green from the trees that wouldn't even turn color is turning to fall colors, but you can just see the power of this effect here if you're trying to make a creative edit. And then you can just dial back the opacity of this as well to get somewhere kind of in the middle if you think it's too strong. Then we have some really powerful black and white filters here, so you can see black and white normal or black and white matte looks really cool as well. And my favorite probably is black and white contrast. So this adds a nice black and white with a high contrast. And these will work for portraits or for wildlife or for landscapes, you name it. They are definitely versatile. So one thing that I also like is the structure filter here. So let me show you an example of structure. So structure is going to add some really nice contrast and details, and you can always dial this back a little bit, but that in combination with the black and white filter can make a really nice high contrast and detailed, almost kind of gritty looking black and white shot. And then last but not least, we also have some sharpening up here, and this is a smart sharp filter. So this is going to be intelligent sharpening. It's going to actually mask it out from the edges during the process. So this is your unsharp mask here. By default, the parameters are usually pretty good. And if we zoom in here, we're going to see that we don't have any type of haloing effect from the sharpening because we've actually masked it out of the edges. So if I turn that off and on, you can see it's a very strong sharpening effect. And by default, it's at 100%, and you can just dial that back in the opacity to kind of define that sweet spot if you like as well. And then jumping into the correction section here, I'm going to stamp visible real quick and I'll show you some noise reduction. So if we apply this, it's going to be different from the noise reduction in Camera Raw, for example, but it works really well. So I'll click OK. This is the default settings here. And if I turn that off and on, you can see that noise reduction there. So this is very handy for astro stuff as well as just high ISO landscape shots also. And then we also have a remove chromatic aberration filter here. So if you click that, then all you need to do is paint with white on the black layer mask, and you'll just paint that chromatic aberration right out of the shot. So this is really helpful if you're having problems getting rid of chromatic aberration using Lightroom. This is definitely a alternative method that works really well. Also, we have a very good sensor dust filter here. So this is going to help reveal the sensor dust in the photo. So you'll just click sensor dust, and it's going to create this map for you to be able to see your sensor dust. So this is really helpful before you save an image for print, for example, because if you save it with these sensor dust in it, then it's going to definitely show up in the print. So this is essentially just a roadmap for the sensor dust. So what you'll do is use this as a guide, and you'll select the layer below that actually has the sensor dust, and then use something like the spot heal brush. And you're not going to actually see these update as you click, because again, this is just a map. So I'll just go through and I'll click underneath and then turn this off as I go, and you can see that we've removed that. So generally I'll do this and remove the spots from the actual layer itself. So what I usually do is just delete that and then create a new one after I've removed the dust. And then you can zoom in and just confirm that you did remove all the sensor dust before you save your photo. Another cool feature is this dark highlights. So this will find the highlights in the photo and actually darken them. So this is a good way to bring back some of the details from the highlights and also some of the color that may get lost in a bright image. Then we also have auto tone and auto color. So auto tone is going to sample the image and try and correct some tones in it, and sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. Auto color will do the same thing. It's going to sample the image and then correct the colors. So in this case, this actually looks really good. It took away some of the color cast from the image. So a lot of times I'll run those just to check, and then I'll drop the opacity of the actual layer to taste and then kind of get it to where I want it as well. And then next up we have darken, lighten, and color layers. So these will just essentially produce a layer or a blank layer with that blend mode. So these are really helpful if you're trying to make corrections, whether you're trying to lighten or darken something or do a color layover. So for example, if you had red headlamp in a foreground and you did a color layover, you could just take your brush and then sample the color that you want to replace it with. So for example, if we paint over the foreground with this green now, you can see we can get rid of that blue and only the color shows through. So this is really handy for correcting flares or just, random lights or any type of color defects. We also have a hard light layer, and some people use this for dodging and burning or adding hard light, for example, to fake like sunlight or something like that. Holding down shift and click will give you a linear light layer. And then we also have dodge and burn. So by default, your dodge and burn layer is going to show up at overlay. And if you do shift and dodge and burn, it's going to give you a soft light dodge and burn. And then we also have frequency separation, which is really good if you're a portrait photographer, but also useful in some landscape and architecture and other random scenarios. Like I've used it before to get rid of footprints and shadows on the snow, for example. So the way that this works is you edit the texture and the color separately. And essentially you're just going to zoom in on whatever you're working with and then use whichever type of tool that you like. I usually use the heel brush. And then you can just sample next to where you're painting, and you can paint out whatever you need. So this isn't a full tutorial on frequency separation. There's tons of tutorials on that online, but this is just a quick overview. So basically you're just editing the color and the textures separately. So for example, if I want to get rid of some of these dark circles here, I would just change the blend mode to lighten. Maybe drop down the opacity or the flow. Let's do flow 20%. You could sample somewhere lighter and then just paint over a darker area, and basically you're kind of getting rid of some of these tones now. So super powerful stuff, whether for portraits or anything else that you can get creative with. And lastly, we have Gaussian blur. So if you need to apply a blur quickly to a photo or a layer mask, you can do so quickly just using Gaussian blur. So that's pretty much it for the filters and correction, guys. Super powerful stuff, especially combining the effects and using it with luminosity mask and different other tools in the panel. So let me know if you have any questions at all, and we'll see you in the next video.